Welcome to chapter 16 of the book of Judges. We're continuing with the story of Samson, the last chapter that deals with Samson. Now, as we learned previously, Samson was dedicated at birth. God came to the parents and told them they were going to have a son, and he was dedicated. And then he went out and he basically had a ministry, if you want to call it that, of attacking the Philistines and wiping them out. He was very successful at that. We see, although in this period of time, he started to deviate, and he went after a woman from the Philistines and married her, and everything started to go bad. And later in this chapter, we'll ask a question that relates more or less to us in the ministry today. But it begins, and Samson went unto Gaza, and Gaza is down here, and Samson's more up over in this area over here originally, and he saw there a woman harlot. So now he's going from bad to worse. Now his weakness was women. Apparently, it wasn't strength because he was a very strong person, but he was vulnerable to the desires of the flesh without thinking of the spirit. And he entered to her, and it was reported to the Gazites, saying, Samson comes here. And they encircled and laid in wait for him the entire night at the gate of the city. And they were silent the entire night, saying, we should wait until light shows through at dawn, and we should kill him. And Samson went to bed until midnight. And he rose up at half the night, and he took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two doorposts, and carried them with the bar, and put them upon his shoulders, and bore them upon the top of the mountain which is at the face of Hebron. And so here's Gaza here, and here's Hebron over here. So he carries us all the way across all this wood. Then it came to pass after this, now it goes even worse, that he loved a woman by the rushing stream Sorik, and her name was Delilah. We've called her that. And the satraps of the Philistines ascended to her and said to her, beguile him and see by what means his great strength is, and by what means we should be able to prevail against him, and tie him so as to humble him. And we will give to you by man 1,100 pieces of shekel. So instead of threatening her, the other woman, the first one, now they're going to bribe Delilah. And she was at the rushing stream Sorek, which goes from the ocean over almost straight across to Bethlehem. I'm not sure if it even has it on here. I don't think it does. But it goes across this way. So she was from that area, the Philistines. And Delilah, I'm going to call her Delilah, said to Samson, explain indeed to me, by what means is your great strength, and by what means shall you be tied so as to humble you? And Samson said to her, well, if they should tie me with 7 wet strings of a bow that are not ruined, then I will be weakened, and I will be as one of the men. And the satraps of the Philistines brought 7 wet strings of a bow, not ruined, and she tied him with them. Now, I think we're talking about one of the dumbest men in the Bible, because it just gets worse and worse. And you would really question, well, how can anybody keep doing this over and over again, making these big mistakes? He must have been really stupid, and we have the proverbial strong man who is very strong, but very weak in thinking, and which isn't the case at all, because there's a lot of very strong people that are very, very intelligent and very many weak people that are dumb. So, but yet the proverbial strong man that's made fun of, sort of like we call the dumb blonde, women that were blonde, and they had that saying, which is not true, but yet it was something that was said by men, sort of derogatory. And so he was, but he, to me, was pretty dumb. But now we have to not remember, but sort of understand that this whole period could have been over a period many, many years, and that it didn't happen 3 times in 3 weeks or something like that. It could have been years in between, and that would make it a little bit easier to understand or to accept. But anyway, she tied him with those strings of the bow, and the ambush sat down for him in the storeroom. So they were right real close. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson, and I'm going to italicize that. And he tore up the strings of the bow, in which manner one pulls apart yarn of hemp in its smelling of fire. And as I mentioned, the hemp is, stipinu is cannabis, and like marijuana, so it had definite smell. And his strength was not made known. And Delilah said to Samson, now, behold, you misled me, and you spoke to me by lying. Now then, report to me by what you shall be tied. Now, if this did happen right afterwards, like it sounds like it was, then Samson, if he couldn't figure out what's going on, then he was really not too intelligent. But he was used by God, and there's a lot of people that are used by God that aren't too intelligent. And myself, I consider myself not very intelligent. Of course, most people that know what I've done with the translating of the Bible say, oh, you're very intelligent, more so than most people. But I'm not. That's the part that's amazing. God has used me, and I could barely made it through high school, graduated, and then I dropped out of college, flunking German twice. I hated foreign languages, and I wasn't good in English grammar. I didn't know a noun from a pronoun, and worked for many years until I was around 45 years old, just regular menial type jobs, nothing great. But then when I gave my life to the Lord decided he would use me for the translation work and gave me the ability to do that, like he did with Samson. But now, I've made a lot of bad mistakes in my life, even after I did give my life to the Lord and went into the ministry of doing this translating work. So I can relate to Samson and a weakness with women and so far. And so then he says, if by binding they should tie me by new ropes, which were not used in their work, ergonomics comes from that, then I shall be weak, astheniso, the verb asthenia, weakness, and I will be as one of the anthropon, men. And Delilah took new ropes and tied him by them, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the ambush sat in the storeroom, and he pulled them from his arms as thread. And Delilah said to Samson, well, until now you misled me and spoke to me lying. Announce indeed to me, by what shall you be tied? And he said to her, well, if you should weave the 7 strands of hair of my head with the warp, and hammer in the peg into the wall, then I will be weak as one of the men. So it came to pass in his going to sleep that Delilah took the 7 strands of his head and weaved them in the warp and pinned them by the peg into the wall. Now, how he didn't know this was all happening, I don't know, but this is the story. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he was awakened from out of his sleep. Hypnotic. That's where hypnotic comes from. And he pulled out the pegs in the woven work from out of the wall, and the warp, for he knew not his strength. So he was so strong he didn't realize it. And Delilah said to him, well, how do you say I love you and your heart is not with me? So now she's going to put him on a guilt trip, and the women can manipulate men, and she is doing a good job of doing that. You don't love me. And if you really love me, you would do this or you would do that. And man wants to please his wife, and he does it. And so this is basically what she's throwing at him. And it says, this third time you misled me and did not report to me by what means your great strength is. And it came to pass when she worked him by her words, that means she really did the job on him, complaining all the time, you don't love me, and the whole night, and troubled him, that he was faint-hearted unto in death. And he reported to her all the things from his heart. So now he's going to tell her everything that will work, for he would lose his strength. And he said to her, a razor shall not ascend upon my head, for I am a Nazarite of God from out of the belly of my mother. So therefore we see that he was chosen from out of the belly of the mother. And I just spoke to a man yesterday, and we were talking about the politics in the United States and the two different parties, and one party is against abortion and the other one is more or less for it, encourages it. And this man was of the other side, encouraging it. And if he would see the Bible that we are designed from the belly of our mother, then we wouldn't be having these abortions. But unfortunately, it's become a way of birth control today. It's terrible. And then he says, and if I should be shaven, my strength shall leave from me, and I shall be weakened, and I will be as all the men. Now, he didn't give the glory to God right here. Instead, it was a physical thing that he was strong by. And Delilah knew that he reported to her all his heart. Cardion, cardiac, is the derivative. And she sent and called all the satrapas. You can add that to your English derivatives book as a transliteration of a satrap, like a governor of the Philistines, saying, ascend this once, for he reported to me all his heart. So now this time we've got it. And they ascended up to her, all the satraps of the Philistines, and they offered the silver in her hands. So like a Judas Iscariot with Christ. And then she rested him between her knees. And she called the barber, so he's sleeping, called the barber, and he came in and shaved the 7 curls of his head. And it began to humble him, and his strength left from him. And Delilah said, the Philistines upon you, Samson. And he was awakened from out of his sleep. And he said, well, I shall go forth and I'll do as continually before, and I shall brush myself off. No problem. And he did not know that the Lord left from him. Now remember, at the beginning I was saying all these things that he was given a ministry, did very well. I think it made me think of today, of all the different people that God has put in ministries. And all of a sudden they become very successful. Many people come to experience that ministry, whatever it is, preaching or music or evangelism, tent ministries, all kinds of ministries that are very successful, healings and so forth. But then the person decides everything is going good. He gives in to the vulnerability of his flesh or something else, but he basically leaves the things of what God would have him to do. Now the question is, if one has a ministry and he sins, can the Spirit be removed from him? And it says it right here. And he did not know that the Lord left from him. So the Lord left him and his, if you want to call it a ministry, of attacking the Philistines and killing them. But I believe that that's a possibility. So if a person is in a ministry and he's doing good, but then takes advantage of his freedom and starts sinning, yes, I believe that God can leave that person. Now, this isn't salvation or deliverance, as I call it, but the ministry. And because we'll see that God did come back later in the end of this chapter. And the Philistines took a hold of him and gouged out his eyes, pretty gross, and carried him unto Gaza. So now they went down there on the ocean, the Mediterranean. And they bound him with shackles of brass, halkes, like Chalcolithic era, the Bronze Age. And he was grinding in the house of the prison. And the hair of his head began to grow. So months started to grow right away and starting to get longer. And I'm not sure how long it would take. Depends on the person. He apparently grew a lot of hair, so might have been, I don't know, within a year, as he was shaven. And the rulers of the Philistines came together to sacrifice a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to be married. Later we'll find out about this Dagon when Samuel, when the Ark of the Covenant is taken by the Philistines and put into the temple of Dagon, and the next morning the statue of Dagon fell and broke. And so they took him to Dagon, and they said, well, our God delivered in our hand Samson, our enemy. Well, they're giving their God glory. And the people saw him, and they praised their God. For they said, our God delivered our enemy in our hands, the one making our land desolate, Samson, who multiplied our slain. Travmaties, trauma, comes from that. And it came to pass when their cardio, their heart was feeling good, that they said, well, call Samson from out of the house of the prison and let him play before us, make fun of him, throw things at him, and do all kinds of bad things to this man. And they called Samson from out of the house of the jail. And they sported with him, maybe stuck him with things and tormented him. And they stood him in between the two posts, a duo, two. And Samson said to the young man leading him by the hand, allow me, do this for me, and I should handle the monumental pillars upon which the house stays upon them. So apparently this house, they were up above or below, I'm not exactly sure, but there were these pillars, two pillars that a lot of the foundation was dependent on. If these pillars collapsed, then the house would collapse. And the house was full of men and women. And there's a 3,000 here, it says. And all the satraps of the Philistines were there. And upon the roof, the domatos, a dome comes from that, were about 3,000 men and women, looking at and mocking Samson. And Samson yelled to the Lord. Now he's calling back to the Lord. He realizes that he made a mistake, things that he did, not giving God glory, going after these women. And he said, O Lord, remember me and strengthen me. Indeed, besides, remember me and strengthen me. And this once, O God, and I will avenge one vengeance against the Philistines for my two eyes. And Samson took hold of the two posts in the midst upon which the house stood, and he stayed against them, pushed against them, one at his right hand and one at his left. And Samson said, well, let my soul die with the Philistines. And he leaned in strength, and the house fell upon the satraps, and upon all the people in it. And the ones having died, whom Samson put to death, were in his death, were many over whom he put to death in his life. Now, so see here's got 3,000 people in there, but now I think earlier it said 5,000 back in the earlier in the chapter, was it 15? How many people that he came and so forth. So they may not have all died. He just came against that many. And his brothers went down, Adalphi, and all the house of his father. And they took him and ascended and tombed him between Zorah and between Eshtaol, in the burying place of Manoah, his father. So here, we'll go up there and we'll see right here, Eshtaol and Zorah, and this is where he was from, and he went over there, and not too far from Jerusalem. And he judged Israel 20 years, so that adds on in our computation of the years of that would be the Philistines ruled for 40, and then Samson came for 20 years, which made 60 years on top of the 350, which makes 410. And that's the last of the mention of the years. So if it was 450 it mentions in the New Testament between Joshua and Samuel, then if it's 410, then 450 was the year, so we have 40 years left. In the next couple of chapters, we go into two or three major people, but they're not called judges. And then also Ruth, the book of Ruth will be next, and that's figured in on this time. So those 40 more years could be this story here, and then when we get into the book of Ruth. I hope you'll continue with us in this fascinating book of the Judges. And until the next time, God bless.